Hi everyone, welcome to our latest session at LocalGov Drupal Week. Thanks so much for joining us. This session is entitled An Introduction to Content Migration and is hosted by Simon and Richard from Agile Collective. Hi guys, nice to see you. Thanks to them for running the session. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our event sponsor, Home Connections, owned and led by local authorities and housing associations. Home Connections is a social purpose company supporting a fairer housing sector. Thanks to them. Thanks also to all our councils and supplier subscribers, including Agile Collective, and our supporting partner Netcall, who've contributed so much to the project and to this week. Just a bit of Zoom help. You can decide how you want to view the meeting in the top right of your screen by clicking View. There's various different screen types that you can have. As we go through the session, please add any questions in the chat, and Simon, Richard, or myself will take those towards the end. I'll now hand you over to Simon, who is going to start the session. Thank you very much, Simon.
Great. I'm going to immediately hand over to Richard.
Oh, okay. Well, I might just hand it back. No, I won't. Thank you all very much for coming to this talk. Yeah, we're going to talk about content migration. It's a big issue. It's a big part of what we do. As Tim mentioned, we're from Agile Collective. We are a Drupal specialist design and development agency. We've been going for 12 years, and this slide shows some of our happy faces of our core members. We're also a worker-owned cooperative, and all the people you see here, I think, are members or probationary members. Feel free to ask us about that if you're interested in worker-owned cooperatives. As you know, the organisation Open that's running LocalGov Drupal is also a cooperative. So just to say, we've been going for 12 years, but we have made, rebuilt, migrated hundreds of websites in that time. So migration is a really big deal for us. And migrations come in all shapes and sizes, and yeah, we've had to deal with them all. We're also quite heavily involved in LocalGov Drupal. We've been involved since the start in helping design LocalGov Drupal. We've been involved in migration projects, and we've also been involved in the microsites project. Maria, who's on the previous screen and who's also on this call, is also on the board of LocalGov Drupal. So what we're going to cover today is, very quickly, we're going to start at the grand scale, thinking about how to understand your content. Then we'll go through what do you need to keep, what needs updating, so two options there, and then finally, how are you going to move it? So thinking about project planning, and then we're going to finish up with some issues that you might encounter, tips that we have to pass on. So conceptually, you need to think of the content migration project as obviously having a beginning, a middle, and end. The beginning is actually a strategic question, thinking about what is the strategy, not just for the project, but for your content overall. I'll talk about that in a second. You'll then need to do an audit to understand exactly what it is that you have, and you may well uncover quite a lot of content that you didn't know you have. Then you enter into a design phase, and the design there is of the content structure, but it's also of the rest of the migration project. You'll then lead into a specification phase and then complete the migration. And then afterwards, there are other steps, including celebration and cups of tea. So first of all, how to understand your content. So it's really important that you start either from having a content strategy or start with the intention of developing a content strategy as part of your migration process. What is a content strategy? Well, it is a plan for creating and managing content. You're probably all very familiar with this idea now, but 10 years ago, the idea of actually having a content strategy was kind of considered quite bizarre. And now there are people who are specific content designers, for example. What does it consist of? Well, you may have your own content strategies with very different assets. However, it should always start with user needs, so documented user needs, and that can take the form of user personas, user stories, journey maps, and so on. But we should be trying to move to a world in which we are creating content that is only useful for users at a particular moment in time on a particular device. If we start to embed that thinking right from the start, we're going to end up with a content structure and content strategy that is far healthier, and it's going to make everything we do with that content going forward much easier. It should also consist of agreed aims for every single piece of content that you have, and where appropriate, KPIs, which stands for key performance indicators. So this will help you understand whether your content is actually achieving those aims. You need to identify who owns this content, and that could be individual owners or it could be departments. You need to come up with some kind of editorial guidelines. That could include checklists, for example, that will help editors decide where to publish content, the structure of that content, and how to write that content. It could also include style guides about language, for example. And then finally, it needs to involve a schedule for reviewing and, where appropriate, unpublishing old content. As you will be familiar, it's very easy for content to mushroom in any digital environment because creating it is easy. The reviewing of it is much trickier. So you might even consider automatic unpublishing or flagging items for review on a regular basis. Why start with a content strategy? Well, it's probably obvious to you, but this will help you to streamline your content to only create the content that is actually genuinely going to be needed by users. It will, in general, encourage simplification, both of the bits of content that you're talking about and the overall structure. And most importantly, it will help bring everyone together on the same page so that you can then make decisions as a team about your content going forward as part of the migration planning process. And as part of that, it engages the content creators at an early stage. So it helps this not be siloed with one team. Then that could be any team, but like typically there may be quite a high burden on IT staff in a council, for example. But by going through a content strategy process first, you will engage the creators at that point, and then they will take ownership for that content. And then finally, and quite importantly, it allows us to consider the health of the content that you already have. And in the migration process, it will allow us to embed accessibility and usability standards that we want to meet going forward. So that's your content strategy. When the project starts in earnest, the first thing you're going to want to do is actually understand what content you have. So you'll want to conduct an audit of your content. These come in many different shapes and sizes, often taking the form of a spreadsheet. The sort of information you want to collect as a minimum would be what type of content is this particular item. If it's integrated from somewhere else, or the source of data is somewhere else, you want to document where that data is coming from. You want to understand the volume of the content, how many items are there, but also what kind of volume are we talking about on each node, for example, how many fields. You can also build in some of the content strategy into your content audit. And this is actually very helpful. Who is the intended audience and what is the intended purpose? What do you want that audience to do or to feel after having engaged with that content? And then there are other evaluations you can also include, such as, for example, does this meet agreed accessibility criteria or readability criteria? And we always do this. We do this at the start of most projects, but particularly any project where there's going to be a rebuild or content to be migrated. This is a recent example of a spreadsheet. It's quite a simple one. It contains the title of the node. It contains the type of content. In this case, they're all posts, the URL, dates created, and so on. And it's also moved on to the next stage where the client has decided which content needs to be migrated and which doesn't. We also have a template that Simon will link you to later on in this talk, in which you can see that actually I've just extracted some of the different headings here that you can use. You can also use your content audit either during the migration project or afterwards, and it can grow. You can add other headings such as, for example, who owns this content, or what performance metrics are there around it. What is the user need? Does it meet plain language, clear headings, chunking, those kind of content writing criteria that you want to build in? So Doing a content audit is absolutely essential, and it can scale. So you can start with a download from your existing system, and then start putting it in CSV and start sorting it. But the earlier you do this, the better sight you will get on your content. The next step is to then decide what to do with it. So over to you, Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I'm going to try and drive the presentation while also giving it, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, what do you need to keep? And first fail. Right, most important thing, keeping content costs money. So less is more. So the less content you have, the easier it will be for your users to discover. And having great content is good. If people can't find it, not so good. So that's key thing there. Yeah, try and take a value-based decision making. So yeah, assess. Is the value this content provides us, is it worth the cost of migrating it? And this is something that comes from my experience. Before I came to Agile Collective, I worked in local government for about 15 years. Having wrong information on your website is far worse than having missing information. It's that thing where users will be frustrated if they can't find content. If you give them the wrong information, and they turn up somewhere where they're not supposed to be for a service that doesn't exist, that can escalate, beyond frustration to anger. So how do we decide what we want to keep? So there's a few things here that might factor into your decision making. So traffic, nice and easy to get that from your analytics tool. Recency, obviously the most recent content tends to be the most relevant stuff you have. Yep, your local authorities, there's going to be a bunch of legal requirements on what you have to have published. So there'll be some absolute must keeps for that. Strategic alignment, so that's not just with your content strategy, but also your organizational strategy. How well aligned is this content? And audience value, which we'll cover a little bit more in the next slide. So how do you identify audience value? So there's the traditional approach, there's the surveys, you can put feedback indicators on your website, collect feedback that way. But we find, you want to get really high quality information is to start interviewing your users. So identify how you can segment them, users who come into your site for different services. Obviously, local authorities provide lots of services, many businesses under one roof. If possible, find your users, talk to them, find out what their motivations are, what's going to meet their needs. Including your internal audience. So often in these projects, you'll have stakeholders, you'll have maybe the politicians, senior management, and there can be a temptation to just treat their demands as things that have to be met. But we found a better way of engaging them is to actually treat them like any other audience. So if you're doing user interviews, well, go and interview your senior stakeholders, find out what their motivations are and what's going to meet their needs. And then this thing about insight from your customer-facing teams. So often on a local authority website, you'll have a lot of content that is low traffic, but actually has a high impact. So thinking about information about services, how do I's, these are the kind of things might not be visited that often, but if they save you a phone call to one of your customer-facing teams, that instantly is providing value. So yep, talk to your customer-facing teams, try and gather insight that way. So great, you've done this. You've got a great content audit, you've got a great content strategy. So let's look what needs updating. Yeah, these kind of projects are the best opportunity to update content. You'll have time, you'll have focus, hopefully you'll have money as part of this project. Things that are rare often in the day-to-day. So yeah, you look at your content, what you've got in your content audit, and identify what you want to do with that content. So content that needs rewriting, that could be because you've assessed it as being particularly poor quality, but also it could be because you've decided this is your highest impact content. You want to make these exemplars to demonstrate your new content strategy. Identify things that need structured transformations. So that could be stuff like generating a summary field, extracting images, changing date formats. If it's something that can be repeated over many items, it's a structured transformation. And then there'll be content you just want to keep as is. Lift and shift, as people like to say. So how are you going to move it? So this is, let's get on to the actual migration. Start at the end. So decide how you're going to launch your site. So common approaches, yeah, big bang, we'll launch the site at once, old site goes away, new site's there. Phased approach, which is quite popular. We'll take sections of the site, make sections of the new site live, and then gradually transition to the point where the old site can be decommissioned. And the other approach, dual running. So, we'll have a beta site, which will be, the new version of our old site, and we'll keep them both running for a period of time. Why do you need to do this? Because it's going to identify the types of migration you need. So one-off migrations are great for a big bang approach. Everything's set up to be done once. You do it, and it's done. Top-up migrations are good if you're doing a phased approach. A top-up migration is where you're just adding new content, newly created content to your system. And then update migrations, particularly if you're dual running, you want to do this. So you're not just adding new content, but you're updating things you've already migrated. This tends to be the most time-consuming and complex of the lot. So if you can avoid it, it's a good idea. So what will you migrate? So this slide is to try and show the differences between what we'd consider configuration and data. In Drupal, we tend to advise our clients not to migrate configuration. It is possible, particularly with LocalGov Drupal, because you get loads of great configuration out of the box. So why reinvent the wheel there? But also, this is a chance to decide how your new site's going to work, how it's going to look, how the content's going to be structured. So yeah, let's do your configuration and make it the way you want, and then worry about migrating the data in. So these are just, some of the things we'd consider, what we'd consider configuration, what we'd consider data. So the anatomy of a Drupal migration, it's important to understand how you need to build up this migration. So you need to start with the thing that has the least dependencies. And in Drupal's case, that is normally users. And then you build on top of that things that have dependencies on the previous item. So yeah, quite commonly you'll do files, media, paragraphs, content, and then finish off with any redirects or changes to URLs. There are other things that can slot in, but it's understanding, that sequence. And then, once you got to this point, if you love a spreadsheet, do a detailed specification. No, in fact, even if you hate a spreadsheet, do a detailed specification. So there's an example on there, as much detail as possible. These specifications should be the definitive source of the truth that anybody involved in the project can look at and understand what's going to be in the finished product. These should also be used to form acceptance criteria. So whether you're doing manual testing, automated testing, or a mixture of the two, this should be driving those acceptance criteria for the tests. This was not done by a designer. This is my attempt to express how you should make a decision about automated and manual migrations. The idea being that if you have low complexity content, and even if there's a low volume, it can still be worth doing an automated migration. As the complexity of that content increases, the volume you have to make it worthwhile doing the automated migration also increases. It can be quicker to just manually migrate a bunch of stuff than try and implement a complex migration. There's also a thing in there, manual migrations aren't a failure. They're a great opportunity to review and update content, and they're not really as onerous as they might seem on the outset. So this slide was originally what issues might you encounter. As I started writing it, it became more a kind of things we've learned along the way. So again, take as little as possible. That's not just in terms of content items, but think about things you need. Do you need any moderation states to go across? Do you need previous versions? Do you need unpublished content? The less you can take, the easier this job will be. And then there's this thing about, don't take content just in case. It's going to be much easier and cheaper to add content you've missed than to migrate and maintain stuff that you do not need. So it's not just the migration. Once it's there, you have to maintain it. And it's often the thing that people get most nervous about in a project before it launches. People are worried about what's going to happen to my old content. Is it going to be there? And we found from experience that once the new site's launched, people don't ever go back to that old content. They're only interested in the new stuff. So yeah, as part of this process, particularly coming out of your content audit, you should be able to identify test cases, test pieces of content. These are content that will be across different content types that demonstrate, different bits of data, different fields being in use. And then these test cases can be used for automated testing, for manual testing. And it's great to get those in your specifications, so you know that if I want to test this migration's worked, I know I can look at this piece of content and it will demonstrate the characteristics that prove this migration's been successful or not. This one has no subheadings. This is before you start actually doing the migration part, make sure you've agreed your plan. Changing it at this point is probably one of the best ways to blow the project budget, blow the project timescales. So as far as possible, yeah, avoid changing it once you get into the migration. Yeah, again, manual migrations, they're not a failure. If you have to do a manual migration, it's a great opportunity to improve the content. They don't take as much time as you think, and it allows you to get the content in exactly the structure you want it to be in. But automated migrations are also great. Drupal's Migrate API has been in Drupal since Drupal 8. It's well supported by the community. There's lots of additional functionality that's contributed by the community. So yeah, use it as far as possible. If you're a developer and you're writing migrations, do not try and circumvent Migrate API. You will come unstuck at some point. Another thing is letting Drupal handle IDs. There is a temptation to say that I need all of my old user IDs, I need all of my old content IDs. Again, you can really come unstuck with this, where you end up with overlapping IDs, content migrating over the top of each other. So if you can, let Drupal handle ID generation. And this is very much a developer-focused thing. Yeah, paragraphs are great, heavily used in LocalGov Drupal. But they work slightly differently with Migrate API, and it's just be aware when you roll back content, it will also roll back the paragraphs, even though you haven't explicitly told it to. So in reality, local authorities, you're likely to be doing a mix of automated and manual migrations. So yeah, which is common across pretty much all of our clients. Important things to remember is you need to really make sure you've understood your migration process, that it's documented, that everybody's on the same page. This is how we're going to do it. This is what's going to be automated. This is what's going to be manual. I need you to do this before I can do that. So there's a thing in there about going back to that anatomy of a migration slide. You want to avoid any automated migrations being dependent on a manual migration as far as possible. Wherever possible, if you're making changes, try and make them in your source system, so your current website. If it's not possible, there are options using intermediary sources. So Drupal, you can apply migrations cumulatively. So you could, for example, migrate the body of content that you want, but you need to assign it new metadata. You could do the migration from a database for the body content, and then add to that from a spreadsheet as another migration that contains the metadata. And an important thing we've learned is migrate often. If you're doing particularly automated migrations, we tend to do them alongside our deployments to add to the test site, the new site. This is, we find this important because the most important thing is to make sure this process is understood, that you can repeat it, that it's testable. What you don't want to do is get to the go live date or the day before the go live date, run your migration and find it's not worked. So yeah, repeating this process, trying to catch issues as they crop up. And by the time you get to launch your site, this should be a well-oiled machine. It should go smoothly. So yeah, we've talked about a couple of templates: content audit template, migration specification templates. They are on our website, and I'll share the link to that on the Slack channel. So that is the end of the presentation. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but if you have any questions, please let us know.
Yeah, so you can start sharing, I think, now, Simon. We know we've got lots of different stakeholders in the room here, and we thought it might be interesting to take any questions. If you have any questions about the sort of things that puzzle you, that worry you about migrations, any things that we've said that you'd like us to expand on anymore. Yeah, if there's nothing coming, then we can all just go and start the weekend really early. Oh no, we can get ready for the next LGD session.
I mean, maybe it's interesting to ask, is there anyone in the room on the call who's in the process of doing a content migration at the moment? Is there anyone in the process of running a content migration at the moment? Emma, do you want to tell us about how you're running that at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm copying and migrating content over from one microsite to another Drupal microsite. So we had a Pan Cumbria county-wide microsite for a program, our Family Hubs program. The two councils have since split into unitary authorities, so they're wanting separate Family Hub sites. So I'm currently going through the manual process. I did look at an automated cloning situation, but it actually looked like we'd get more benefit out of a manual process. Like he said, you know, you get the chance to revisit the content as you're going along. So both sites, will benefit from the process. It's only about 150 pages, so it's nowhere near, you know, what it would be like to do a main site. But yeah, just following the same sort of route with what's being shown in the course, and trying not to get stakeholders too involved. Because they can get bogged down in the detail at a stage where you don't need them to, really. And I agree with his point in saying, if you don't think it needs to be there, don't take it over. It can quite easily get added rather than managed in the future. And that's a really, really important point. And the data should tell you whether it's needed as well, really, to be honest. Apart from policy information and T's and C's and stuff. So yeah, a little job, nowhere near some of the big jobs that some of the guys on the call probably face.
And how's it going?
It's going all right. I mean, I love using LocalGov Drupal tool. I've got 2 weeks to complete the site. I'm about halfway through. Yeah, it's going okay. I'm following the same format. They don't want any different format of functionality, which is good. So it's just a really a copy and paste exercise with some revisions along the way. And then it's obviously noting out any revisions to let the stakeholders know at the end of the project. I'm not letting them know as we go because, like I say, they'll get too into the detail and take us off on a tangent. So
yeah, I mean there are a few interesting things there just from your experience that definitely chime with ours. One of which is that I suppose I'd reframe it and say the way that you do user engagement and particularly content owner engagement is really important. So planning for that and doing a lot of that up front, and then being really clear about the process and saying there will be a chance to review either during the manual migration, which is really important, or afterwards is really important.
I mean, what I set up at the start of the project when I'd done the first microsite was I set up a web advisory group and a web working group for this project. The advisory group were you sort of headline stakeholders that didn't want to get bogged down in the detail, didn't really want to do any of the content work, but wanted to know that the job had been done or that campaign had been shared. And then the working group is very much those people that are giving me content, that are giving me resources, that are giving me links, that are going back on and checking the work that's being done and challenging the content design and stuff like that, checking the functionality. So keeping those two groups separate, I think, is really useful as well, because you keep the sort of senior stakeholders happy without getting into the detail with them, but you keep the working group happy without because they can often get quite silenced when they're in a senior stakeholder environment. So keeping those two things separate is quite useful. So obviously we have a trajectory of what's going to happen when, and both groups are updated with that, using Microsoft Planner, Kanban board to take off, you know, jobs that need done this week, areas that have been done, and then any risks and things that need to be brought up with stakeholders further down the line. Things like a piece of content that I'm not sure about, something that possibly needs updated because it's gone out of date already. My big goal now, because I'm Digital Development Office, is to hand this over to a content editor in each of the local authority teams, and coach them a little bit in the next couple of months, because they're not content designers and we don't have a big team of content designers in our local authorities, and our web team is really concentrated on the big projects with the main sites. So my role will be to coach some of those content editors and help them understand how the new components in Drupal. So that's sort of the plan following the migration finishing at the end of November.
That's really interesting, Emma. It'd be great to get a case study of that for the LocalGov Drupal site, because I'm sure that would be super useful for other people doing microsites and similar projects.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful for the Family Hubs program as well. But what I didn't want to do at the start is start brand new, and I know a lot of people find it easy to start brand new from a site, but we had a lot of great content knocking about the council that had been added onto an old Tridian site, and it was just left there unloved and unused and unlaunched, and a lot of consultation work had already happened around that content with partners like our health partners and our public health team and our service delivery team. So, you know, I felt that that was a missed opportunity not to have a look at all that content in the very beginning, back in July, and do a bit of work on that content as a starting point, rather than just go head into a brand new build without. I just feel like we go around in circles in local government, don't we? We do work over and over again, and a lot of teams are doing a lot of the same work sometimes, especially in public health and some of the service delivery areas. So very much figuring out what was already there that at our disposal to use was key to us being able to turn it around quite quickly.
That's super interesting.
Sorry, Tim. Yeah.
No, go for it.
Yeah, it's very unusual that we don't find that an assumption of a total automatic migration gets slightly complicated by the need to review the content as you're going, and actually a lot of the content that we're talking about here hasn't been looked at for some time, in some cases years. So advice may have changed, regulations may have changed, but also almost certainly your expected standards around content readability and accessibility will have changed. So we often find that keeping an open mind about what migration looks like, and including manual migration and automatic migration side by side is often the best way of doing it. And just one other reflection on what you said, I think, and this may go to Sav's question that we can turn to in a second, resourcing is the biggest barrier, but there are ways around that. Firstly, this is entirely scalable, and secondly, putting in a process, the one that you outlined, for example, you don't have access to content designers, but you can put in guidelines and other sets of behaviors that will mean that it takes care of itself. And so you will need to do the planning in order for that to happen. So you will need to allow perhaps more time than you think you have for the planning stage. But once you do that, a lot of this will take care of itself and can be handled by a relatively small team. Thanks for sharing, Emma. Sav, do you perhaps want to ask your question?
Yeah, so I ask essentially, would you recommend a local authority to undertake the entire migration process, automated migration process themselves? So with us, I think we're in a similar position to Emma. So I'm also a digital development officer. I don't actually do much with the CMS. We're not on LocalGov Drupal yet, but I've been fighting for the last however long to get us to that position, and it seems like we're almost there. And this inevitably will come up. Well, what do we do about content? Now, there are three of us, three digital development officers, two of us on CRM, one on CMS. And when we've changed CMSs before, it's always just been a lift and shift. And I think it was mainly around that reviewing the content that's going to be the best way to do it. But I think it took a lot longer than everyone anticipated and everyone hoped. So I think what I'm kind of trying to ask is there, how do you think we can get to a place to where we can trust the content that we've got? And I'm thinking of saying, without having to review every single piece of content, but that sounds absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, any thoughts? Greatly appreciated.
There's this thing in here. It's you don't necessarily need to review every bit of content. It can be reviewing at the type. So you might review news. Do you need to review every single news item you've got? Probably not. But think about what you want to do with news as a content type, and then it may be more specific. So if you've got guides to services, then you might want to review that as an individual piece of content. So it's what we were trying to demonstrate is you can scale how you do your content audit. It doesn't necessarily need to be a list of everything you have. You can group it, because you'll have a lot of content that could take a very long time for very little value.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the thing in here is our experience is the same, that people who want to do and lift and shift and want to take absolutely everything, that ends up being a costly exercise. And actually, you get a lot, not only you potentially saving time and money, but you get the value of being able to review and update your content by doing, a mixture of the two. And I guess in terms of how much could you undertake in a local authority, I mean, certainly everything up to the migration specification element, and then it depends if you want to do automated migrations, what skills you have in house. Certainly where I was at before, Oxfordshire, did an in-house migration. There might be a couple of people on the call who have experience of that, but if you need to bring in third parties, it could just be done at that stage once you have a clear idea what you're doing, and bring them in for a focused task.
Okay. There's a bit of a follow-on question. How would you prioritize what content to review and what content not to review?
So I think it's looking back at some of the things we touched on earlier. So it's like, what's the value of this content? Something like news. The important thing about news is its recency. So your more recent news articles are going to be relevant. Things from 10 years ago, they're probably not going to be relevant. You're probably safe to group it and just understand that the important factor in that content is the recency of it. But yeah, if it's guidance for citizens about how to access housing services, that's obviously you've looked through the audience value, that's going to have high value. Yeah, let's review those content pieces individually.
And I suppose the important thing is to identify how much content you've got and to organize it. And often that organization will replicate the site structure. And you'll be able to see at a glance immediately how much content you're looking at. And a review can, in the first instance, be just looking down a list of all of those page titles and having someone who owns that space understand whether, or give you some feedback about, okay, that looks about right, or this is massively overkill, or actually I've been wanting to review this content for a while. But the most important thing is understanding how much we're talking about. And then you can decide what to do with it. It's also important to remember that you don't have to do all of this at once. So You can bring over a lot, lift and shift it, and then do the review on it as well. That's in many ways that's less ideal, because this isn't a great opportunity to review the content as you're going, but it can be done. And the fact that you've just surveyed that data to start with will be the beginning of that conversation.
You got anything to add, Sav? Any other questions?
No, that was actually very, very well explained. So our main site, I wouldn't even want to think about how many bits of content we've got on there. So going off of what Emrid said about not wanting to start afresh, at what point would you ever recommend going down the starting afresh as opposed to going down the route of migrating hundreds and hundreds of pages and reviewing the hundreds and hundreds of pages? Which I appreciate is a funny question on a migration call.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're doing a D7 to D10, for example, you know, we might think of it as a migration, but it's you know, it's a rebuild to start with. Yeah. This is where it comes down to the content strategy. How deep do you want to go, and how much do you want to start to tackle everything at the same time? And this may go back to the heart of your question at the start, which is, if there's a smaller team of you, and you feel you've got the skills to get through those first few stages that Simon mentioned, just acknowledge that it's going to take a long time to do it, and you're going to have to get more resources allocated to you. Maybe get an extra pair of hands on it, or do it over a much longer period of time.
I think it's just adding to that. It's the time you put into the planning. So every stage up until the point you're doing the migration, the time you put in there will pay off massively. And you know, if you need to make a case to anybody to invest time there, you know, it will return. You know, I don't want to give a figure exactly, but you know, you will get returns.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, guys. Well, I don't think there's any other questions. There's a couple of comments from Stella. First one is, don't forget to put in redirects for the content you're leaving behind. Yeah, thanks, Stella. And for anyone with a Drupal 7 site, Anatech have written a module to generate those migration mapping spreadsheets that Simon showed for automated migrations that may be able to help people, and she's popped a link in the chat. If you've got any other questions for Simon and Richard, or you think of something later, I'm pretty sure they're both on Slack, so you can get in touch with them directly there. And I think that is all we've got time for. So thanks to Sav for your questions, to Emma as well for her comments. Thanks to Simon and Richard from Agile. It's a great session. Thanks to everyone for coming. We hope you found it useful. There's only 2 sessions left after this one for LocalGov Drupal Week, but do go and sign up for them. You can get them on the Luma account, and I will put that link in the chat now. We've also organised a social event that I should tell you about on the 1st of December in London. So go and have a look at that. It's on our Drupal. On our Luma account as well. Should say thanks to Home Connections for sponsoring this week. You'll see me again in about 15 minutes in the next session. You can sign up for that on Luma. But that's it from us. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you again soon. Thanks, guys.